Final Fantasy VII is a game. That's it. That's the intro. I, I didn't think this through too much. Hello, Metal Witcher and Seven, and I am here talking about Final Fantasy VII. In case you didn't understand that from the intro or the poorly made thumbnail that I made for this video. So, yeah, I was going to type up a script for this and turn this into a pretty well formatted and well thought out video essay, but I was like, no, let me not do that because that's just a lot of work. I probably still could do that, but I I just want to do this. I think it'll just be easier. So I'm just gonna record my audio and then I'll add in the background clips later, and hopefully it'll all just match up wonderfully and perfectly. So yeah. Anyways, Final Fantasy VII. So I'm sure that a lot of people are tired of hearing about this game. Um, but to me, it has been a genuine pleasure to experience this amazing game for the very first time this year, in the year of our Lord 2024, which is crazy. The game has been out since 1997, and getting to experience a game like that this year for the very first time with no outside knowledge, with no spoilers, well, except for one, but um, has been great. And it's just fun getting to do that type of thing as a gamer, like getting to play, the usual new games that come out every now and then, but then you get to experience something classic, or dare I say retro. I know that makes me feel old too. Um, Getting to experience that type of game for the very first time that you missed out on in your childhood, and then you're like, oh man, like if I was young back then and I got to experience something like this, I probably would have never stopped playing it, something like that. But it's interesting too because when you go back to play an old game like Final Fantasy VII, for example, or just any type of other game, and then you get to play that without the nostalgia, like without growing up with it, and with the perspective of you as an adult or you as you are now, like older and more grown up, it's just interesting to form your own opinion. And I can confidently say that even without the nostalgia of growing up with Final Fantasy VII, like a lot of other people have, I can confidently say that Final Fantasy VII is a game that I would proudly put in my top 10, maybe even top 5 favorite video games of all time, with just how I felt playing it, the amount of hours that I've put in. It's still not a lot compared to other people, I'm sure, but just this entire experience. And I'm not just going to talk about the original, I'm also kind of cheating when I also include Remake, Rebirth, maybe a little bit of Crisis Core, and the Advent Children movie. That's not really a game, obvious. Well, it's not a game, obviously, dumbass. Self-roasting myself, but yeah, that was bad English. Self-roasting myself. What? Anyways, so yeah, Final Fantasy VII. Oh man, it's so good. So yeah, I just kind of want to talk about my experience with the game, how I started playing it, and my overall thoughts on not like the entire experience. Like I'm gonna try to keep things as spoiler free as I can because you never know. Someone might be watching this and they'd be like, "Oh, well, I kind of want to play this game now if this guy says all these good things about it." You know. And I do want to make these kinds of videos more often. Like I would love to tell stories of my first Witcher 3 playthrough or my first Dragon Age playthrough, like just games that are close to me, like games that I hold dear to my heart. Like I would like to revisit those types of games and those types of experiences and not make like a video essay, but just talk about them because I love talking about that. Just stuff that I love. It's just fun. It's interesting. So without further ado, yeah, story time. So, story begins. It was March of this year. I had just Started a new playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, and I was going through the B word that all of us gamers feel at one point in time, and it's a word that all of us gamers fear with some of our favorite games. The B word, of course, being burnout. Burnout is something that is very common these days, especially with me. I just find it's becoming easier and easier to be disinterested in a game whenever I start playing it, even if it's a game that I know for sure I love. It's just it's like trying to force myself to be in the right mindset to play something. It can be tricky sometimes, especially if it's a game like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, where I had just recently done a 90 to 100 hour playthrough, my second playthrough of the game, and it was wonderful. It was a great playthrough. But then right after that, I did a speed run, and it was an honor mode playthrough, and oh my god, like I barely recorded anything from that run, but let me tell you, it was stressful. It really was, and it was a speed run, so it wasn't fun. But I got the trophy and the yellow dice. I don't really think they're gold. I would just say they're really bright yellow. So, anyways, yeah. So after that, I was like, okay, let me just do a third playthrough and let me just make the exact same character that I made for my second playthrough. Male, human, fighter, romancing Shadowheart. The basic build that a lot of other people do. You know. And I was about 12 hours in, and I was just like, you know what? Like, it's just not clicking for me. And this was also around the time that I started a new job, so I was really focusing on that, on top of also focusing on college stuff. So I just didn't really make a lot of time to play Baldur's Gate 3. So I was just like, you know what? Maybe this is a sign. And plus, at this time, patch 6 had just released. So the game was still getting patched. I had to update mods, blah, blah, blah. So I was just like, you know what? Let me put this game down for a while. Let me try something new. Or let me revisit a game in my library like Fable 1 or Final Fantasy 9, like something I have not played in years that would be brand new to me. And I was so set on doing Final Fantasy 9, I was going to start it that same day. But then I saw recommended to me on Steam Final Fantasy 7. It was like $3.49 on Steam. I'm like, you know what? That is a bargain. I have never played this game. Why have I never played this game? Well, I simply never owned it. I have played every other mainline Final Fantasy game, like including the pixels. Like I played 1, I played 2, I played 3, 4, 5, 6. I sort of played 8. I didn't really like 8 too much. 9 was the very first one that I played, and 9 was also one of the very first video games that I ever played. It was the first RPG I played, I believe, right before Oblivion. I played 10. 10, man, oh, 10 was good. Didn't play 11 because it's an MMO, I believe, or it's an online game. Don't care about that. 12, I dipped my toes in, and just like 8, I remember just not liking it too much. 13, I did play, and I actually played 13 too as well. It's not a mainline game, but 13 too, I didn't mind. I actually liked it more than 13, but you know, 14 is an MMO, and I did actually recently play that for the very first time not too long ago, but again, it's an MMO, don't really care. 15 I did play around the time it came out. I think it was a year after, actually. And I got about 50 hours into it, but I just kind of put it down after a while. And then 16 I recently played for the very first time, and I gotta get into it a little bit more, but I like what I've played so far. It's only about like 8 hours. All of those games, except for 7, I played. I never owned 7, never had a physical copy, didn't even have a digital copy. It was just a game that eluded me for all these years. So the only spoiler I had seen from 7 is the moment that we all know, Aerith's death. oh my god, spoiler warning for a 30-year-old game. Oh my god. Probably should have put a warning up. But yeah, that was the only spoiler that I had known for the game. I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know the context for what was happening. And the only reason I knew that is because of the Watch Mojo videos that took off like in the early like the mid 2010s, like like top 10 saddest video game moments, or stuff like that. You know those are decent videos. It touched my heart when like Walking Dead season one's ending was on one of those lists. I was like, oh yay, I get to suffer with other people. Anyways, fun fact, that was actually the first time that I ever cried at the end of a game. Just, more admin lore. So anyways, bought Final Fantasy VII. I'm just like, you know what? I am going to try this game. Worst case, play it for an hour or two. If I'm not getting into it, then no harm, no foul. I could just put it down and go on to the next game on my list. Usually what I like to do, I like to make like a playlist of games that I want to play in order, or just to have some kind of notion as to what I want to play for this year. So I was just a casual enjoyer of it before I started playing Final Fantasy VII, and then once I started playing it, it consumed my soul. It's very dramatic, but it's true because I started playing, I believe it was late March, and now we are in August. It has almost been 5 months straight of just Final Fantasy VII, not just the base game, but Remake, Rebirth, and Crisis Core. Those have been the four games that I have been religiously playing for almost 5 months now, which, fun fact, is almost longer than the amount of time I spent playing Baldur's Gate 3 last year. Like, oh man. So when I first booted up the original, I had no idea what to expect. I knew nothing about the game. Like, I didn't know how it started. I didn't even know what the music sounded like. And it took less than an hour for me to just be like, okay, I'm interested. I want to see where this goes. And before long, I was a fan. The nostalgia hit me like right away. It's like the turn-based menu screens, the fight menu, the inventory screen, the music, the PS1 sound effects on the PC version. I did mod the game, by the way. I did. So if you're seeing footage that looks a little weird from the PS1 version, that's probably why I used Seventh Heaven to mod the game. But I didn't really like change too much, just the visuals. Um, yeah, getting to play this game for the very first time this year was crazy. Now, I'm not going to say that Final Fantasy VII is like the greatest game ever made or anything like that, but to me, it just felt like a really nice trip down memory lane, like a nostalgia trip, despite the fact that I never played it, because it really did remind me of Final Fantasy IX, which was the first real video game that I ever played. So in a lot of ways, I was reliving my childhood through this game without actually playing 9, which it sounds a little weird, but like it still feels new to me because, I never played it. So getting to experience that while also feeling a little bit of nostalgia for another game just like this, I just think that's kind of interesting. So Final Fantasy VII, yeah, the story, it just immediately hooked me. The characters, like, there's not, when you compare them to Remake, they do kind of seem, I don't want to say, no, I'm not going to say that. I was going to say it seems like a little less, but I think that in the original, for a few of the characters, I would say less is actually more, if that makes any sense. Um, so I got about 10 hours into the game, and I noticed that Final Fantasy VII Remake, was on sale on the PC. I didn't realize that it was on Steam. I had no idea. So I was just like, oh my god, it's 50% off. I get paid tomorrow. oh my God, I could buy this. And I kid you not, when I bought it, I got it downloaded. Um, and I was just like, you know what? Let me just boot it up real quick. Like, let me just do a quick, like, little run, like a run through, and like do a few fights and just see how the game is. And when I tell you, I immediately fell in love with it. I was like, oh my God. And I remember I was like walking around doing a few fights as Cloud, and I'm just like, oh my God, like I need to stop playing. I need to stop playing right now because like I'm not going to be able to appreciate it later on. So I immediately put down my controller. I turned the game off. I'm just like, okay, nope, we're not doing that. I need to play the original first because I really wanted to, and I was right to do that because especially with Final Fantasy VII Remake, I don't think that it's correct to be labeling it as a remake. I would say it's more of a continuation or a reboot than a remake, if that makes any sense. Because when you say remake, a lot of people are like, "Oh, this was going to be a one-to-one reimagining." Like, I mean, that's kind of how remake is, sort of. But to put it simply, when it comes to remakes, I feel like it's best to play with the knowledge and the experience of the original source material. Just like with Resident Evil, because I just think it's fun. I don't want to say it's like the main attraction, but I just think it's fun doing that and then like having the experience of the original to be like, oh, they took this out, or oh, they changed this. And in the case of Final Fantasy VII Remake, for a lot of the stuff, it's just like, oh, they expanded upon that. That's cool. So, my first experience with Final Fantasy VII, I'm sure some people are wondering, oh, who did you try to romance first? And this is probably going to shock some people, but I was sort of in between Tifa and Aerith. Now, yes, I know this is a completely stupid part of the video, but it is something that is pretty popular in Final Fantasy VII's community is the shipping debate between Cloud and Aerith and Cloud and Tifa, or some cases Tifa and Aerith. It's a bit of a passionate debate but on both sides or all three sides, and then there's the fourth side that are just like, hey, what are the best builds? And that little side is the most peaceful discussion. um but yeah, I was a bit on the fence because there isn't like the pacing of the original game is so fast. I feel like you don't really get that much breathing room in the Midgar section to really form or see a lot of those bonds progress naturally. It's not until you get out into the open world that's when I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But still, the pacing feels very fast compared to something like the Final Fantasy VII remake, which I'll go into more detail about in a little bit. But yeah, the pacing is just really fast in the original, which I appreciate. It's just nice to be able to boot up a game and just like go straight into it, and you're just like, okay, I'm done with the Midgar section. Now what? And you just keep going on from there. So so when it comes to the shipping debate between Cloud and Tifa and Cloud and Aerith, like I was just kind of in the middle for a lot of the playthrough, and I was just making dialogue choices based on how I felt. Like I really didn't want to use a guide unless I was getting stumped on something like a puzzle or just where to go. Like I was really trying not to use a guide, and when it comes to the dialogue choices, I didn't do like anything for favoritism. Like I was just playing the game how I wanted to play for my first playthrough. And it was funny when I got to the gold saucer uh, for the second time that you have to be there. That's when I got Tifa's date. I'm just like, really? Like, I really thought I was going to get Aerith's for some reason. I don't know why I thought that, but. And then it was around that time that I was really starting to like Tifa more and more as the game progressed, but you just don't really get a lot of moments with Tifa. And I could tell that it was a bit more focused on Aerith, which because she's more important to the overall story, like of the planet and beating Sephiroth. Like I understood that almost immediately. Like I could tell, like okay, she's a Cetra, so she's the last ancient, so she's going to be very important later on. and important she is when she dies. And oh man. So experiencing this death for myself, I actually remember exactly when it happened. It was April Fool's. It was like at 11 a.m. on April Fool's. I know I was off that day. That was the day that I made a lot of progress on the main story. It was a very emotionally draining day. And I got to experience that for the first time on my own. Oh man, it was just rough. It was rough. Like I remember the boss fight that transpired right after. Aerith's theme was still playing in the background. I loved that so much, but I hated it because it was just such a sad scene. Like even without the voice acting, like the visuals tell the story, and man. But then right after that, disc 2 begins, and I was shocked at how early Aerith's death was because there's 3 discs in Final Fantasy VII. That happens at the end of disc 1, and then we're going into disc 2. And I'm like, "Oh my God, like this is we're only at the halfway point of the main story." Although disc 2 is shorter to be fair, but still. It was just crazy. And it wasn't just Aerith's death scene that got me. Like earlier in the game we had the Barrett and Dine sequence, and that scene to me is still very underrated. And then we get Cosmo Canyon with Red or Nanaki and his dad Seto. And I don't know what it is about this scene that gets me. Like it just gets to me. Like it's so it's probably so cheesy to a lot of other people, but like I just really enjoy this scene and it gets me. Like it really gets to me. I don't know why. And then the fact that you can skip Gungaga entirely and you don't even get you could just choose not to drop in on Zack's parents, who, I'll talk more about later. I thought that was so interesting because that's like a reference to a pretty important character in Cloud's life and Aerith's life. Like the fact that you can just skip that area entirely and just keep on trucking along, like I just thought that was really cool. And it's just like one of those things that you would miss out on if you weren't paying attention. I just thought that was kind of neat. And I don't even really consider that like a secret or anything, but it's cool to like label it as a secret. Just like how you can miss out on recruiting Yuffie, and you can miss out on recruiting Vincent as 2 playable characters. Most of all the other party members are mandatory, but not those two. So I thought that was really interesting when I did that. I was like, oh, that's why I got a trophy for doing that because they're technically optional. That's pretty cool. So yeah, disc 2 happens, and that's when you get to the reveal of Sephiroth, like how Cloud was, he wasn't even at Nibelheim during the tragedy, and the North Crater scene where he's just broken, like he hands the black materia to Sephiroth, and man, it's rough. It is rough. And then Tifa is the party leader for a while after escaping execution in Junon from Shinra. And I predicted that like this would basically be like the part of the game where you got to see a lot more of Tifa, and I was right, and I'm so glad because to me that was the one character in disc 1 to me that I felt didn't really get a lot in terms of like representation or just characterization in general. Like I probably shouldn't have said representation, but just content basically. And here you are playing as her, but not for very long, at least in the main story, because then you find Cloud in a wheelchair, and Tifa, being the pure soul that she decides to stay with him. It's like if the world's gonna end, I might as well be with the person that I love and care for the most. And yeah, that was the moment that I was just like, wow, like she is something special. And you play as Sid as the main party leader for a while, and then you come back 2 missions later, and then both Cloud and Tifa fall into the life stream. It looks so hilarious. It looks so stupid, but it is so funny. And then you get the infamous and wonderful live stream sequence between Cloud and Tifa. It is just wonderful. It is my favorite part of the game, hands down. It doesn't even come close. Like, oh man, so good. Like even without the voice acting, like you learn so much from this sequence that you probably already knew or you probably suspected, but just getting to know that. And then you get to the climax where you learn that Cloud really was there the whole time. He was just in disguise, like he just hid his face so Tifa didn't see him because he was just ashamed. And I could go into a lot more detail, but God, it was just so good. This sequence is just great. I'm so excited to see how this sequence is going to be adapted in part 3. Like, I want this to be a whole chapter of the game. Just Cloud and Tifa. Maybe you can throw in some other appearances if you really want to, but I don't think it's necessary. Just in my opinion. Just in my opinion. Anyways, so then Cloud is back and he does a little recap of all of the stuff that has been happening. And then from there, it's basically just doing busy work. And then you get the other infamous scene with Tifa and Cloud under the high wind. And it was at this point that I realized, like, you know what? I am all in on Tifa and Cloud. Like, that is a pairing that just came out of nowhere. But I ship it to death. It's no disrespect towards Aerith, obviously, but especially after playing Crisis Core, I just don't feel that way about her and Cloud together. I just don't. And I don't want to go into that much detail because then this video will get review bombed or hate commented, bombarded by people. Just, I don't care about the shipping stuff. I just don't. But for me personally, I understand the the infatuation. Let me just stop talking. So, yeah, you get that scene, and then you go into disc 3, and then you fight Sephiroth. And oh man, when I first played this game, and when I first did Sephiroth's fight, I did it the fair way. Meaning, I went through the dungeon, I took my time, I didn't save at all because the save crystal was glitching, so I was just like, okay, just gonna do a straight-faced, no BS run, try to get everything I can before fighting this man. And I was still unprepared, and I died the first time. And oh man, when I tell you that I was tilted, I really was. But I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna let that deter me. I'm gonna do a speed run of this, and I'm going to be prepared this time. And the second time, I kicked his ass, and I was ready. I equipped ribbons on everybody, and I just, it was good. It was a really good second attempt, even if the fight itself was still really annoying for the first playthrough. And then getting to see that ending for the first time, I was just like, oh man, wow, that was an experience that I'm never going to have again. That's the crappy thing about playing through a really great game. It's like, it's amazing, but it's the only bad part is knowing that you will never feel that way again. Unless you wait a few years and then you just happen to forget all of it. But and then the very next day, guess what I did? You're correct. I started the remake. I had a few hours to kill before work. I got up super early and I got about like 4 or 5 hours into the remake, made it to chapter 3, and I was already in love. I loved how all of this stuff was being expanded. I loved how everyone looked, how everyone sounded. I heard voices, and I'm like, oh my god, there's voice acting. It did get a little crazy though, like when you're walking through Sector 7, or just any crowded hub area, and there's so many voices that overlap. It's kind of overwhelming actually, and I really don't like how there isn't a way to turn the chatter down like in other games. I really wish that was implemented, but even in Rebirth there isn't a way to do that. So there's a note for part 3 that I really hope Square Enix does. Anyways, so yeah, remake, there's not really a lot to say. I just really enjoy it. I think it is a wonderful adaptation over the Midgar section. Like, do I wish that more could have been done in this game besides Midgar? I do, but that's why we have Rebirth, which I'll talk more about in a second. The first playthrough of Remake, I went into it completely blind, and I'm glad. And, I didn't really struggle with it. Like, it was fun. It was awesome to point out all of these awesome callbacks and nostalgia, and like, oh my god, they're doing the motorcycle chase. And the music, the combat, the gameplay, really, the only thing I still don't really like that much about Remake are the side quests. It's not the amount of them. I just don't really think a lot of the quests are good. That's like my only actual complaint about Remake. Like they're not horrible, but I just think they just don't really they're just not really that good in my opinion. Just my opinion. And of course, the character expansions. Like, you just get so much more screen time with Tifa and Barrett, Aerith, even Red 13 at the end, and, other characters too, and Cloud especially. There's just a lot more to dive in. And of course, the foreshadowing and the moments that you get between the party members, like Cloud and Barrett, Cloud and Tifa, Cloud and Aerith, the character relationships that are slowly being formed, and then they blossom even more in Rebirth. Like, it's just wonderful. Like, oh, it's so good. It is so good. And then we get to Rebirth. Now, before I played it, I had started to see spoilers for it because once you start sharing something on Instagram, Instagram is going to take that as, okay, you're starting to share this stuff. Well, we're going to show you we're going to show you some more of the stuff that other people have posted. So I did see some spoilers for Rebirth. I mean, it wasn't anything major, thankfully, but one thing in particular that I saw was the Sky will date for Tifa. Now, I'm not going to say anything, but I did see it before I got to play through it for myself, and I was pissed, but at the same time, I was fangirling. There's no other way around it. I was fangirling, and I was like, oh my god, you know, like they did it, they did the thing. So that was so stupid. So yeah, but but when I saw that Rebirth was a PS5 exclusive, like I understood why, and I was like, you know what, I could wait. And then I finished Remake, and I just felt that empty feeling. Like I was like, oh man, like, do I? Am I gonna be patient? It's gonna be like 2 or 3 years. Like God of War Ragnarok came out in 2022, and it's now getting a PC version. I believe it's this month or next month. So that's 2 years later. Same thing happened with Final Fantasy VII Remake. It released in 2020, and then I got a PC version, I believe, in 2022. So it's just like, okay, am I going to be able to wait until 2026? And the answer, quite honestly, was no. So I saved up some money, and within a few weeks, I got my first PS5. At that time, or before this, I was so dead set on not getting a PS5. Like there was just no game that, in my opinion, I felt was worth it. The only game that came close was Spider-Man 2, but I'm so glad I didn't buy a PS5 just for Spider-Man 2 because, no offense, but I just don't really think the game was that worth it. Just in my opinion. Just in my opinion. I think the 2018 one was better. Just between us. It's still good, it's just not as good, in my opinion. Um, so yeah, I got the PS5 strictly for Rebirth, and oh, I was so excited. I got it hooked up after work, and I was just like, okay, quick, I gotta get the game, I gotta get the game downloaded, and it took all day to download. Like I got home at like 3:30, started downloading it at like 3:45, and then it took until maybe 6 o'clock before it was fully downloaded. I was so mad, but I was like, okay, you know what? Fine, let me start the first chapter. I want to get started. And God, oh man, it was so good. Like I didn't want to stop playing, and it was so funny too because at that time, right after I had to work like about 6, 7 more days in a row. I think I actually ended up getting sick on one of those days, so I had to call off. It was just kind of funny, like the timing of it, but every day I played Rebirth and I was hooked. Like I was so ready to play it and oh my God. I can't talk about any spoilers because, I don't want to ruin the experience for anybody, but when I say that Rebirth is my game of the year, like, that's just kind of a given because I don't play that many games when they come out. But for me, Rebirth, it hit me on the same level as Baldur's Gate 3 did last year. Like, obviously, I think that Baldur's Gate 3 is more impressive because it's from a less known developer compared to the Ubisofts or the Bethesdas or the, stuff like that. But for me, Rebirth is just such an impressive game. Like, it is so fun, addicting, and it just has so much to love. It's just beautiful. Like, not just visually, but, the soundtrack, the combat, the gameplay, the exploration, and the story and characters. Like, oh my God, there's just so much to love, and I am so happy that I got to experience this. It's part of the reason I'm making this video, honestly, because Rebirth, it's just one of those games that reminds me why I love video games so much. It makes me feel that type of way. And you can imagine how devastated I felt when it was over and when I realized part 3 is not going to be out until maybe 2027, and that's probably pushing it. I feel like it might be an extra year even if they reuse a lot of assets. Like, so yeah. I now when it comes to Rebirth, if you're playing it casually, it's a great game. If you're trying to 100% it, that's a different story. Like it's still fun, but you're just gonna have to be prepared. So this isn't a spoiler, but the mini games were the biggest bane of my existence for about a week ever since like when I decided, you know what, I want to go for the platinum because that would be a great way to commemorate my first PS5 game is platinuming it. And I'm still in the process of doing that technically, even though I haven't played it in a while, but let's just say that as soon as I said that, I did the crunch minigame. Yeah, that took off a few years of my life, I'm pretty sure. Oh my God. Just thinking about that is giving me nightmares. And just it's hilarious explaining my process of doing that and then looking back on it and I'm just like, dude, I was such an idiot. Like I had to put a pillow on the left side of my TV. I had to use a blanket to cover up the score underneath Tifa and Jules, well, underneath Tifa. And then I muted my sound so I didn't have to hear any background noise and I closed my door. I sat really close to the TV, like uncomfortably close, and I was just so locked in. And then I remember texting one of my friends, like maybe Sephiroth was right, and she had texted me that she was struggling with it too. And this is funny, and this can't be taken out of context, but she sent me the photo of her completing it, and I noticed that she had Tifa's swimsuit equipped. So when I saw that, after I sent the message, like maybe Sephiroth was right, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm equipping the swimsuit. And I kid you not, 3 attempts after doing that, I was able to beat the challenge. And I was just like, oh my God, the power of the swimsuit. So when I tell you I love Tifa, I don't think like some people will like kind of be like, "Oh, you're just saying that." Like, no, I love Tifa because I would not have gone through that if it was with any other character that I would be playing as. Like, and that was like another main reason I wanted to do it. Like, I just wanted to get that champion's belt for her because it wasn't too bad of an accessory to have for her at that point in the game. At least so I thought. It actually wasn't a good accessory. The reward was really not worth it. Maybe if I did it in chapter 7 when it became available, then maybe. But no, I was already at like chapter 8 or 9 at that point, and it was kind of useless. So I was like, oh, okay, never mind. But yeah, fun times. And the rest of the mini games, I didn't really struggle. I don't want to talk about just the mini games. That's actually a separate video I wanted to do. So, anyways, let me move on. Um, But yeah, Rebirth to me it just captured everything that I loved about the original, but obviously with the production value and the the shininess factor of the remake. It's just there's just so much to look at and so much variety with how to play and the enemies too, like the enemy variety and the soundtrack, and that's not even mentioning Queen's Blood. Like, oh my God, I was so addicted to Queen's Blood. Like, it became Gwent for me. I was stressed out at first though, because I was like, oh man, this is a game that I actually have to try to be good at. And then once I got it down, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. I still prefer Gwent, but Queen's Blood is pretty fun once you understand how to play it. Yeah, and then after almost 125 hours, the playthrough came to an end, and I did not take it well, as I usually don't. When I finish a really great game that I love, it was over. Just like I said earlier when I played through the original for the first time, it's like it's amazing, but then it's horrible when you realize you will never feel that way again, which I want to stress is not a bad thing. Like you can still replay the same game over and over again and feel some type of way, but to me the first playthrough is special. Like it's just a very specific type of special that you will never feel ever again, and that's what sucks when playing these types of games. Especially if you're really committed to what you were playing. Oh, man. So naturally, I did what any sane person would do, and I played through the original again, but not a full playthrough. I actually just finished Midgar, and I was like, I kind of want to wait a while, come back to it in about a month, and I did. I played through some other stuff, and I started Dragon Age Origins because the Veilguard game got revealed, and I was like, oh man, I'm excited to play that. Let me get Dragon Age going. But then something happened, and I was just like, I'm not over Final Fantasy VII yet. Even though with the power of hindsight, I probably should have waited, and I'll explain why in a minute. Um, yeah, so I played through the original again, this time to record it with the voice acting mod, which, by the way, is actually not bad. I enjoyed the voice acting mod a lot more than I thought I would have. And that's where all of this footage is from the original. It's modded with the voice acting mod, and it's pretty good, not gonna lie. A lot better than I thought it was. And then after playing through the original, I was like, alright, it's time to start up Remake. And where I'm at currently is I am in, I believe it's, yeah, chapter 15 of Remake. And here I am recording this video because, unfortunately, the B word I talked about earlier, burnout, has crept in with Final Fantasy VII. I mentioned that it has been almost 5 months since I started my first playthrough of the original, and I did spend a pretty big portion of that time in Rebirth as well, which is crazy to think about. Yeah, the burnout is it's definitely there for Remake. Now, to be completely fair, I am like basically at the end of the game for remake. But I don't like playing these types of games, especially games that I love, when I'm not in the right headspace to fully appreciate them. Even if I've already played them, like I still like to be in a specific mindset when I play a favorite game of mine. 'Cause, like that's the reason I play these games. Like well, it's one reason I like to play these games. It's just fun. It's comforting, you know. But yeah. So what's the main takeaway of this video? Well, it's just really me ranting about why I love Final Fantasy VII so much. Oh, and I forgot to mention, yeah, I did before I went into remake the second time, I actually finished Crisis Core as well and played through that game for the very first time, and I gotta be honest, I'm not a fan of it, actually. For for like 90% of it, I'm just not that much of a fan. It's mostly the gameplay and the side quests, but and the missions. But those last few chapters though, that was good. And the ending, of course. Oh man, yeah, the ending. So yeah, Crisis Core was good, and I also forgot to mention, after I played through the original the second time, I watched the Advent Children movie for the second time, and that was when I really started to appreciate the movie more for what it was. And I felt like a lot of the references and everything else in the movie, it hit a lot different when you play it right after beating the game, like the original game. Like I thought that was really cool. So that was fun. I just wanted to mention that now because, I'm running out of stuff to talk about. The story time is almost over. Um, but yeah, Final Fantasy VII to me has been a wonderful comfort zone, a wonderful experience, just like so many of my other favorite games have in the last few years, like Witcher 3, Oblivion, Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption 2, The Walking Dead Season 1, um, Fallout New Vegas. I mean, there's a lot of games that I could include just in this short little time period. Baldur's Gate 3, obviously. Um, yeah, it's just crazy, man. Oh, it's just crazy. Oh yeah, Mass Effect. Yeah, I forgot to mention Mass Effect. My bad. But yeah, it's just crazy to think that. And when I said earlier that Final Fantasy VII to me, it would be a game that I would feel confident in putting in my top 10 or even my top 5, and I still hold true to that. It's yeah. At the time of writing and at the time of recording, sorry, it's been a very stressful few months. Lots of decisions had to be made, changes started happening, and yeah, it's been a mental struggle. But there's been silver linings, of course. Video games have always been a beloved hobby of mine that I will always cherish, but I do appreciate them more as I've gotten older. And this is unrelated, but ditching the strain of multiplayer games a few years ago, it really did help me learn to appreciate single player games again. Like I've always been a single player guy, but there was a time period not so long ago where I was really addicted to Overwatch, Dead by Daylight, and other online games. And those games are still fun, not Overwatch, but you know, and part of the experience of single player games, it's getting to revisit older games from my childhood and playing through them as a young, semi functional adult. And most of the time, the games hold up really well and better than when I was a kid. But then getting to experience a game that I never got to play when I was younger as an adult, it's different, because again, like I said earlier, I just didn't have the nostalgia of experiencing this game when I was younger. Like, Final Fantasy VII has been a game that has eluded me all of my life, despite how easily accessible it is, how popular it is, and how easy it is to love. It's just crazy, and it was an unwelcome surprise this year, or a welcome surprise, I should say. Sorry, I meant to say it's an unexpected but welcome surprise, but English is not my first language. I think it was sarcasm, but yeah, it's not really new to talk about this game or its impact on the gaming world since its release in 1997, but this video has just been a nice way for me to praise this game for being that comfort zone for a really big portion of this year. 5 months almost. It's crazy. And yeah, I do feel a little crappy that I wasn't able to like make this into a very delicate video essay or whatever, but um, I think that I think this was still effective. And I haven't even talked about the soundtrack either. Like I've gone this whole video without praising. I think I brought it up like once or twice, but I didn't even get to praise the soundtrack. Like, I love the soundtrack for this game, for all the Final Fantasy VII games, like the original, remake, rebirth, even Crisis Core. Like it's just fun. I mean, I have like this funny, kind of vision whenever I listen to these songs. Like Tifa's song, to me, it's just like peace. It feels like home. It's like a calm before the storm. Aerith's theme, to me, it's kind of like saying goodbye to that comfort zone. It's saying goodbye to the memories, and you just feel that sense of hopelessness. Fight On, or Those Who Fight Further, like the like it feels like a really awesome moment where you're like feeling triumphant even against overwhelming odds. And then you hear One Winged Angel and your reality comes knocking, and your personal demons, they like tear down this wall that you've created for yourself. Like you were just feeling good, but then all of a sudden, Sephiroth. Just, if you ever need someone to blame, just blame Sephiroth. It's like, did Sephiroth do this? Yes. Yes, he did, Cloud. And then I love the battle theme too. Like the battle theme, like One Winged Angel only plays once, and it feels like the end of the world, an end to your illusion. The only real thing is Sephiroth. But then the battle theme is something that plays all the time, like the da 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 da, that plays all the time. And to me, I feel like that is just like, despite everything, you're still fighting adversity. You're still never giving up. And I don't know. It's silly, I know, but that's just like, it's very rare for me to think about songs in a soundtrack that way. Like a lot of the times with a lot of my favorite soundtracks, like I just hear a song, I'm just like, oh, this is actually really cool. But for me to actually think about a song and like try to compare it to a way that I'm feeling, I don't really do that too often, you know. And hearing a lot of these songs, it just, again, it just feels comforting. Feels like a nice moment. I do love Tifa's theme. And hearing all these songs acoustically are pretty nice. It's pretty nice too. But anyways, I'm just rambling at this point. Um, yeah. So that is basically the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you made it this far in, I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and Um, yeah, I would really love to do more of these types of videos, like where I just talk about my experiences with some of my favorite games. I think the next one I want to do is honestly The Witcher 3. It actually occurred to me, like, my channel is called Metal Witcher underscore N7, and there is barely any Witcher content on here. There's more Mass Effect content than there is Witcher, and there's more Final Fantasy content than there is Witcher content. So I need to rectify that at some point. So that would be very fun to do. But yeah, I'm also sick at the time of recording this, but this has actually been a really nice way to help me feel better. Just talking about stuff that I love, it's just comforting. And I'm proud of myself for not turning a part of this video into a 20-minute rant about why I love Tifa so much. That might be a future video, I'm not gonna lie, but for now, I just want to say thank you, and yeah, that's all for now. I should go.
I mean, I guess it is. Kinda.
Ever since we left Midgar on this crazy journey, ever since we were kids, even, I can't remember a time like this. A time when we were this close. Or am I getting ahead of myself again?
Again?
Yeah. Again.
Not one bit.
We should probably head back to our rooms.
Yeah, probably.